So hi folks, this is Amit and just quickly telling you how to remember trigonometric ratios from 0 to 360 degrees, and I'm talking about standard values such as 0, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, 90 degrees, 120 degrees, 135 degrees, and so on till 360 degrees, right? So the normal confusion here is if somebody asks you what is sine of pi by 2 plus theta, or sine of pi minus theta, or what is cos of pi plus theta, or what is tan of 3 pi by 2 minus theta, or for that matter what is sine of 3 pi by 2 plus 30 degrees. So we don't know what's the answer here, and I will tell you a very easy shortcut to remember it, and that should help you. Let's quickly go. So I've just written some sample values. Sine of pi plus pi by 6. The answer should come as, so this is sine of pi plus theta, and it should be minus sine of pi by 6, right? And pi by 6 is 180 divided by 6. So sine of 30 degrees, we know sine of 30 degrees is 1 by 2. And so the answer would be 1 by 2. How do you get it this with absolute ease? Or for that matter, what is cos of 3 pi by 2 plus theta? Now 3 pi by 2 would be as good as 270 degrees plus theta, and I would get the answer as sine theta, right? And if the answer is, how do I get this answer as sine theta? Let's quickly check all of these and I will tell you a shortcut. Right now we know very clearly that this is 0 degrees, which is 0 radians. This is pi by 2 radians. This is pi radians. This is 3 pi by 2 radians, and this is 2 pi radians. Now I don't want to get into radians and degree conversion, maybe I'll have another video on it. But pi by 2 clearly means that this is 90 degrees, pi means 180 degrees, 3 pi by 2 would essentially mean 270 degrees, and 2 pi would mean 360 degrees. So I'm talking about a full circle which starts from anti-clockwise and then goes in the clockwise or rather it goes in the complete anti-clockwise direction. It starts from 0 and goes till 360 degrees, which is 2 pi. Okay, great. Now in textbook we know that there is something called as all silver and tea and cups, right? And let me quickly bring it to all silver, tea and cups. And what does all silver teacups means? All the values are positive in the first quadrant. Only sine and cosec are positive in the second quadrant. Only tan and cot are positive in the third quadrant, and only sec, cos and sec are positive in the fourth quadrant, right? And let me bring those details to you and you'll be able to understand better. But one thing also you need to remember that how do conversion take place, right? For example, sine of pi by 2 plus theta, right? And so pi by 2 plus theta, you are moving into the second quadrant. Now this is the first quadrant, this is the second quadrant, this is the third quadrant, and this is the fourth quadrant, right? So sine of pi by 2, which is 90 degree plus theta, which means you are moving to the second quadrant. Now a sine can possibly remain, when you find the answer for this, the sine can possibly remain as sine, or it may change, or it may also, the answer may also become as cos, right? And we don't know what is the answer here, whether it is sine or cos. But you need to remember that it can never become as sec, or it can never become cosec, or it can never become tan, or it can never become cot. So the possible conversion or sine across pi by 2 plus theta, pi by 2 minus theta, pi plus theta, pi minus theta, 3 pi by 2 plus theta, 3 pi by 2 minus theta, and 2 pi plus theta, 2 pi minus theta will always be, either conversion will be sine will remain as sine and cos will remain as cos. The same logic applies to sec. Sec, for example, when you say sec of pi plus theta, so pi plus theta will come here, and when I say sec of pi plus theta, whatever is the answer, right, whether it is sec theta or cosec theta, the answer will all either be sec theta, sec of something, or cosec of something, right? And I'll tell you what it will be, but let us not get confused about what the answer will be. But answer will be one of these two. It can never be cos theta, sin theta, tan theta, or cot theta. So which means sine and cos are one pair which plays with each other, right? The sec and cosec are pairs which play with each other. Cot and tan are pairs which play with each other. Let me explain with you in case of tan, right? When I say tan of 2 pi minus theta. Now this is 2 pi, right? And minus theta I'm talking about, I'm jumping back in the fourth quadrant. Now the answer to this could be anything, right? It could be tan theta or it could be cot theta. I don't know. But we will figure that out as time goes, right? But you have to remember that the answer will either be tan theta or cot theta, but it can never be sin theta, cos theta, sec theta, and cosec theta. Which means the play groups are sin and cos and sin, sec and cosec, cosec and sec, cot and tan and cot. I hope this is clear with you when we start now deriving these values. So now these are basic shortcuts that you need to remember, and if you do, the life becomes very easy to find any damn value on this table, the standard values of course. And when I say standard values, it could be as good as what is sine of 270 degrees plus 30 degrees. Now looks difficult, but we got to make it very easy, and we will. Okay, after knowing which are the standard pairs that you have, let us see how the values would change and who would be positive, right? I've already told very clearly that all values are positive in the first quadrant. It is sine and cosec who are positive in the second quadrant, tan and cot are positive in the third quadrant, and cos and sec are positive in the fourth quadrant. Now, what does that mean? Right. So let me jump to the first quadrant, for example. If I tell you what is sine of pi by 2 minus theta, right? And when I'm saying minus theta, I would again jump back in the first quadrant. How is that? Is as good as writing what is sine of 90 degrees minus theta, right? And 90 degrees essentially means I stop at this vertical line, and minus theta, which means I'm again jumping back in the first quadrant, right? And in that case, whatever is the answer to this eventually, whether it is cos of theta or sine of theta, and I told you very clearly the pairs are very simple. The answer would be either sine of theta or cos of theta, right? And we'll figure that out, but I'm saying the answer is one of them. But remember that the answer will always be positive whatever happens, right? Whether it is cot of pi by 2 minus theta, you know for sure cot plays with only tan, so the answer will either be tan theta or the answer will be cot theta, but you know for sure it is the first quadrant, and since whatever transformation is happening in the first quadrant, and hence the values will always be positive, right? Now let me jump to the second quadrant. Now let me quickly jump to the second quadrant, and I'm talking about the second quadrant, right? And I'm jumping on the vertical axis, right? And or the horizontal axis. And the horizontal axis is my x dash, and vertical axis is my y dash, right? Now what you need to remember is, if I tell you what is of sine of pi by 2, which is my vertical line, plus theta, right? And that is as good as I'm telling you what is sine of 90 plus theta. And why to take sine all the time, right? And what is the answer for this? We don't know. Or let's take cot of pi by 2 plus theta is equal to almost cot of pi by 2 plus theta is can be rewritten as cot of 90 plus theta. And what is the answer for this? We don't know. Let's figure it out. But I am jumping in the second quadrant. Now what happens here is, who is jumping in the second quadrant? Forget the answer what you get here, whether it is cos theta, sin theta, or here it is tan theta or cot theta. One of the two will be answers, right? It will be either tan theta with a positive negative sign, or it will be cot theta with positive negative sign, right? And here it will be cos theta with positive, one of the sign positive and negative, or it will be sin theta with positive and negative sign, right? We'll figure that out, not to worry. But my question here is, who is jumping in the second quadrant, right? And it is actually sine who is jumping in the second quadrant. Who is jumping? It is sine. Who is an important question. Sine. If sine is jumping in the second quadrant, remember whatever answer you get here for sine of pi by 2 plus theta, right, will always be positive. Now I know in this case the answer is cos theta, and how do you get cos theta? I'll come back to it. But the answer will always be positive. For example, if I were to say that what is jumping in the second quadrant, let's say if I say tan of pi by 2 plus theta. Now who is jumping in the second quadrant, right? Now it's tan who is jumping, but what is positive in the second quadrant? It is only sine and cosec are positive. Is tan positive in the second quadrant? No. And who is jumping? It is sine. When sine jumps in the second quadrant, or cosec jumps in the second quadrant, that's when the answer, whatever answer you get, it's positive. The answer is written here. Now, who is jumping in the second quadrant? Tan. So the answer will not be positive, but the answer will be negative. Answer actually comes out as cot theta, but I'll tell you how is the answer cot theta. Give me some time and I'll tell you how to remember this too. Right? So you are very clear. So for example, this is pi. So if I tell you what is sine of pi minus theta. Now pi is the horizontal axis, right? Now answer can be either sine theta or it can be cos theta. We know from these pairs. But the answer, would the answer be positive or negative? Now who is jumping in the second quadrant? Where on the left hand side of the equality sign, who is the one who is jumping? And that is sine. And if sine jumps in the second quadrant, what is the answer that it should eventually get? The answer is positive. Now one of them is the answer. It is either sine or cos. I'll tell you what is the answer. The answer is actually sine. But how do you get it? I'll come back to it. Not to worry at all. But you need to remember, how do you get this as positive? I'll take few more examples. Now let me take one more example, right? And if I tell you what is tan of pi by 2 plus theta. When I tell you tan of pi by 2 plus theta, remember who is jumping. Now which quadrant is this headed to? This is headed to the second quadrant. Why? Because pi by 2 is the vertical line and plus theta, which means this is plus theta. Whatever is the angle plus theta jumps in the second quadrant. Who should jump in the second quadrant, and that should give you the answer. If it is sine who jumps in the second quadrant, the answer is positive. But if tan jumps to the second quadrant or in the second quadrant on the left hand side of equality sign, the answer will be negative. That is what we should be absolutely clear about. Same is with here. If I were to say what is sec of pi minus theta, right? Now sec is reciprocal of cos. Is sec or cos? If who is jumping on the left hand side, it is actually sec or cos. Now sec is actually inverse of cos. Now if sec is jumping, right, and who should actually jump on in the second quadrant? Now when I'm saying pi minus theta, it's actually this. It's actually pi minus theta, which means this is pi, the horizontal line is pi, and minus theta, which means it should come inside. This should be the angle, right? It should pi minus theta. Now my question here is, forget, I don't want to confuse you with these lines, but naturally this should fall into the second quadrant. Is when the sec jumps in the second quadrant, whatever answer you get here, would that be positive or negative? Only if sine who jumps or cosec who jumps, the answer is positive, which means the answer for this should be negative. Now whatever is the answer that you get, the answer is negative. Now let's quickly go to the third quadrant, right? And for example, the third quadrant, when I say this is the third quadrant. Now, who is positive in the third quadrant by the same logic? It is tan and cot. And who should jump? Now, I am saying, for example, sine of pi plus theta, right? When I'm saying pi, now this is pi, right? And pi is the horizontal line, and the theta plus theta would naturally fall in the third quadrant. Now who is jumping here? It is sine on the left hand side of the equality side who is jumping on the left in the third quadrant. Who should jump actually in the third quadrant to give you a positive sign as the answer? It should be either tan or cot. If sine jumps in the third quadrant, the answer is negative, whatever is the answer here, right? For example, if I would say what is tan of pi plus theta, the answer clearly is positive, whatever is the answer here, right? Because whenever tan jumps in the third quadrant, whatever answer you get here will always be positive. Same goes here. Let's look at this as 3 pi by 2 minus theta, right? Now I'll take example of cot of 3 pi by 2 minus theta. Now what is 3 pi by 2? Which is the vertical line, right? And when I'm minus theta, which means actually I am jumping inside the third quadrant. Plus theta, we would have jumped in the fourth quadrant, but we are jumping in the third quadrant. Who is jumping? It's actually cot. Cot is jumping. Now, if cot would jump in the third quadrant, the answer would always be positive. Let's take another example. If I would say what is sec of 3 pi by 2 minus theta. Now, when I'm saying 3 pi by 2, it's the vertical line, right? And if I'm jumping from the vertical line minus theta, which means actually I'm jumping in the third quadrant. If sec jumps in the third quadrant, is the answer of sec going to be positive or negative? It is definitely going to be negative, whatever is the answer. So we are very clear about when does the value become positive and when does the value become negative. Let me take again an example of fourth quadrant. Same logic, but I'm just explaining again so that you will understand it better. Now let's go into fourth quadrant. Who should jump on the left side of equality? It should be cos and sec. Then only whatever answer you get on the right hand side should be positive. Now let's look at an example. When I say 3 pi by 2 plus theta, right, that means you are clearly jumping from the vertical line into the fourth quadrant. Or if I would tell you what is 2 pi minus theta. Remember 2 pi plus theta would take you to the first quadrant, right? Because plus theta would jump the vertical line and go into the first quadrant. Here. Let's say if I would let cos jump here, when I'm saying cos of 3 pi by 2 plus theta. Now who is jumping? If it's cos who is jumping here in the fourth quadrant, then whatever is the answer that you get for cos will always be positive. But on the flip side, if tan were to jump, tan of 3 pi by 2 plus theta, right? Remember, whatever answer that you would get would always be negative. Why? Because it's only cos and sec. When they jump on the left hand side of the equality, that point of time the answer is positive. It's tan who is jumping. I have written it in the first quadrant, but I'm just wanting to write it here. It's 3 pi by 2 plus theta, which means actually you're talking about the fourth quadrant, and when 3 pi by 2 plus theta is the fourth quadrant, the answer will always be negative. Let's take one more example. What is cosec of 2 pi minus theta? Remember, cosec of 2 pi minus theta. Cosec of 2 pi minus theta, which means who is jumping? It's cosec who is jumping. In which quadrant it is jumping? It is jumping in the fourth quadrant. Now, who are positive and negative in the fourth quadrant? It's only cos and sec who are positive in the fourth quadrant when they are on the left hand side of equality. That means they are jumping. If cosec is jumping in the fourth quadrant, the answer whatever we get here will definitely be negative and it will not be positive. Right? But we need to remember very clearly, going back to our basics, the conversions are very simple. A tan will get converted to either tan or cot. A cosec will get converted to cosec or sec. A cos will get converted to cos or sine. And sine will get converted to sine or cos, and so on, right? The conversion of sine will never be cot or tan or sec or cosec, right? We need to keep this in mind. I know I might have confused you halfway, but I'm sure in the end I will get going and make so simple that you should be able to remember. Okay, so now we understand when are the values positive. I reiterate, for all values in quadrant 1, the answer is always positive, right? Only when sine jumps in second quadrant, whatever is the resultant value on the right hand side of equality is always positive. So again repeating, sine of pi by 2 plus theta will always give you a positive answer here, will never give you negative. Who is jumping? It's sine. Same is with tan. If tan of pi plus theta, the answer would always be positive here. Now I'll just go back here. What happens when tan of pi minus theta? Now who is jumping in the second? Tan of pi minus theta, who is jumping? It's tan who is jumping in the second quadrant. This is the second quadrant. Now who should jump ideally in the second quadrant to get you a positive answer? It should be sine or cosec. They are not jumping. Who is jumping? It's tan who is jumping, which is the left hand side of the equality. So whatever answer you get should be negative and not positive, right? But what is the answer? Let us come back to it. For timing, I have always evaded the question of what the answer should be, right? But I will come back to it. Always remember one thing. Now I am coming back to what the answer should be. Now we are clear with what signs should be, but now what the answers should look like. For example, whenever you have a vertical axis, right? Vertical axis. This is your vertical axis and this is your horizontal axis. Horizontal axis and this is your vertical axis. Right? Whenever there is any movement across vertical axis, which is either it is pi by 2 minus theta or it is pi by 2 plus theta, right? This is a vertical movement across vertical axis. And what is a horizontal movement? It is pi minus theta, which stays in second quadrant, and it is pi plus theta, which stays in the third quadrant, right? So pi minus theta was second quadrant. By this logic, this is again a vertical movement. Vertical movement would be 3 pi by 2 minus theta, which would stay in the third quadrant, and 3 pi by 2 plus theta, which would stay in the fourth quadrant. But this is a vertical movement, right? When I'm saying vertical movement, the angle is jumping from here, not from horizontal axis. And what would be termed as a horizontal movement? The angle here is 2 pi, right? And whenever you write 2 pi minus theta, right, that would be the movement across the horizontal axis, right? So I hope we are clear what is vertical movement and horizontal movement, right? Good. Now we need to be very clear about one fact, and we are coming to almost end of this video, that whenever there is any vertical movement, that is pi by 2 minus theta or pi by 2 plus theta, or 3 pi by 2 minus theta or 3 pi by 2 plus theta, always remember the trigonometric function changes its identity. When I'm saying identity, it's a very complex statement that I made, but I'll make it very clear. If you write this as sine of pi by 2 plus theta, right? Remember that the identity of sine has to change either to sine or to cos, but it cannot change in one of these other ones, right? So the identity will become cos theta, right? Because it's jumping in the second quadrant and on the vertical axis. Whenever you jump the vertical axis on either sides, whether this side or this side, the identity on the left hand side changes to another identity. So sine will become cos here, but you know for sure that who is jumping to the second quadrant? It is actually the sine who is jumping to the second quadrant, and hence the value will be positive. Now I'll take another case here. What is tan of pi by 2 plus theta? Now who is actually jumping in the second quadrant? It's actually tan. But if tan jumps in the second quadrant, because all silver teacups tells me, if tan on the left hand side of the equation jumps, will my answer be positive? No, it will be negative. And if it is negative, what should be my answer? Remember one thing, whenever we jump on the vertical axis, the identity changes, and we know how the identity change. The tan will either remain as tan or become cot, but it will not become sec, cosec, sine or cos. We are very clear about it, right? Now let me go back to another example. When I am calling cot of pi minus theta, right? Now let me go to the horizontal axis. Now when I am talking about, this is the horizontal axis and the jump is from the horizontal axis. Okay, who is jumping on the left hand side of the equation? It is cot. If cot would jump in the second quadrant, will you get a positive answer? The answer is no. So the first thing is that the answer will be negative. But if any trigonometric function like cot, sine, cosec, sec, anybody who jumps right from the horizontal axis, always remember the answer remains, the trigonometric function doesn't lose its identity, so it will continue to remain as cot theta, which means if you would call this as what is tan of let's take a better example, what is sec of pi minus theta, right? Now if sec is sec, who is jumping in the second quadrant? It's sec. Now if sec would jump in the second quadrant, will the answer be positive? No, it will be negative. But remember, are we jumping across the horizontal axis? The answer is yes. And if we are jumping across horizontal axis, should the function remain as sec? The answer is yes, the function should remain as sec, and the answer is sec theta. Always remember, whenever you jump on the horizontal axis, the value remains the same. I will tell you one more example. What is tan of pi plus theta, right? And when I'm saying tan of pi plus theta, which axis are you jumping? You are jumping actually from the horizontal axis. So you know for sure the value is going to be tan theta only. It doesn't change the value. But what is the sign here? Who is jumping on the left hand side of the equation? It is tan. If tan jumps, all silver teacups, if tan jumps in the third quadrant, whatever answer you get is always positive. So the answer turns out to be positive, right? Let's look at the other way around. If I tell you what is sec of pi plus theta. Now again I am jumping from the horizontal axis, right? Pi is 180 degrees, this is 180 degrees, and I am jumping plus theta, which means I am coming into third quadrant. Now which axis did I take? I took horizontal axis. If sec would jump in the third quadrant, would give you a positive sign? No, it would never give you a positive sign, because it's only tan and cot on the left hand side of the equality. If they jump, they give you a positive sign, which means this should give you a negative sign. And we clearly said if the jump, right, is along the horizontal axis, not the vertical axis, then sec remains as sec. It would have changed at cosec, but it doesn't. Why? Because we are talking about horizontal axis. Let me change the shade of the pen and tell you about the vertical axis now. What if I would have told you what is um, tan of 3 pi by 2 minus theta, right? Which axis are you jumping? You are jumping the vertical axis, right? Now you got to be very clear. Now tan, who is jumping on the left side of the equation? It is tan. If tan jumps on the left side of the equation, should it give you a positive answer? The answer is yes. But which axis is it jumping? It's jumping the vertical axis, right? And moment it jumps the vertical axis, it loses its identity and it becomes cot, and it doesn't become sec or cosec, because we are very clear tan will either stay as tan or it will get converted into cot, but there is no other identity that it takes, and hence it becomes cot theta. Let me give another example, right? Now 3 pi by 2 plus theta, this is jumping in the fourth quadrant. Now let's say if I take example of tan of 3 pi by 2 plus theta. Now if I tell you 3 pi by 2 is equal to, now there are two things here, one is sign and one is the value. Now, who is jumping in the fourth quadrant? It is tan. It is cos and sec. If they jump in the fourth quadrant, then only the final outcome is positive, right? Who is jumping in the fourth quadrant? All silver teacups. It is not cos or its reciprocal sec, but it is tan. And if tan is jumping in the fourth quadrant, the answer has to be negative. And we told very clearly that when you jump across the vertical axis, tan loses its identity and it becomes cot, right? Cot theta. Let me take another example. Let's take cosec. What is cosec of 3 pi by 2 plus theta, right? And let's look at it. Now, who is on the left side of the equation and who is jumping in the fourth quadrant? It is actually cosec. Now, cosec happens to be the reciprocal of sine. Now, if cosec is jumping in the fourth quadrant, who should actually give you the answer positive in the fourth quadrant? On the left side of the equality. If it is cos or sec on the left side of the equality, then they should give you an answer positive. But who is jumping? It's cosec. And if cosec is on the left side of the equation, it should give you a negative answer. But now, if you are jumping on the vertical axis, right? And if you are jumping on the vertical axis, will you change the identity of cosec or not? The answer is yes. And the cosec will become sec, right? And or cosec, but it will never become tan, sine or cos or cot. And so cosec becomes sec. Why? Because it is jumping, first is in the fourth quadrant and hence its value is negative, and it is jumping across the vertical line. Why vertical line? Because 3 pi by 2 is 270 degrees plus theta, right? And so you are jumping, taking help of this vertical line, and hence it becomes minus sec theta. Now let me take an example of 2 pi by 2 pi minus theta. Let me take sec of 2 pi minus theta, right? Now 2 pi, which means I am talking about the horizontal line, right? And minus theta, which means I am staying in the fourth quadrant. Now fourth quadrant, if I were to find the answer for this, is sec positive? Whatever is sec positive in the fourth quadrant? Yes. If sec is on the left side of the equation and it is jumping, then the answer for sec should be positive. So we get a positive answer. Always remember, when you have a horizontal axis, does sec lose its identity? No, sec stays as sec, right? Whether it is cos, sine, tan, cot, sec, cosec, they don't lose their identity and they stay as it is. So it stays as sec theta, right? Let me take a couple of more examples because we are almost ending this video here. I will want you to get this thoroughly. I'm afraid if I did not do a good job, but please do write back to me. I will create another video if you did not understand. But my intention is this should become super easy for you, and we should be able to manage. Let me take a couple of example more here. For example, if I would tell you what is tan of pi by 2 minus theta, right? Now pi by 2 minus theta, which axis are you talking about? You are talking about the vertical axis, right? And we told very clearly, all silver teacups, which quadrant are you jumping? The first is you are jumping in the first quadrant. If you are jumping in the first quadrant, all values are positive. That's over. And now when you jump across the vertical axis, tan loses its identity and becomes cot, right? So answer is cot theta. Let me take another example, right? Okay, let's look at few examples, right? And the rule, this is rule number 1 that we talked. The rule number 2 that we talked. Okay, let me not confuse you by writing 2 there. You might get confused. And the rule number 2 we said vertical axis the identity changes, right? So when I say identity changes, example, a tan would become cot, has to become cot, right? Identity, vertical axis. But on the horizontal axis, and I say vertical axis, that is y dash, and horizontal axis I am talking about x dash. The identity does not change, right? So for example, if I were to tell you what is sec of pi minus theta, this is a horizontal axis, the answer whatever it is, whatever sign, but the answer will still say as sec theta. Let me write the answer, all silver, so that is sine, right? So sine and cosec have to be positive. Who is jumping here? Sec. So the answer has to be minus sec theta. How do you get it? I'll come back to it again, and I'll solve few examples and let us see. Okay, so now we are saying again tan of pi by 2 minus theta, right? So the first thing that you need to ask yourself is uh, all all positive in the first quadrant. If it's sine or cosec on the equality left hand side of equality sign, then whatever comes here answer is positive. If it is tan of something something, or if it is cot of something something, then the answer on this side will always be positive. If it is cos of something something, or cosec, which is reciprocal of it, sorry, sec, which is reciprocal of cos something something, then the answer on this side will be positive. We are very clear about it, right? Because who is jumping here? Cos and sec. Who is jumping here? Tan and cot. Who is jumping here? Sin and cosec. And who are jumping here? All of them, right? So we are clear. Let's look at few examples. Tan of pi by 2 minus theta. First thing, which quadrant it is? First, pi by 2, it's the vertical axis. If it is a vertical axis, will tan lose its identity? Yes, it will become cot theta. Will sign change? No. Why? Because it will be plus cot theta, right? Why? Because all of them are positive, so the answer becomes positive. Let's look at another example. What is sec of pi by 2 minus theta? Now, what is pi by 2 minus theta? It's the first quadrant that you're talking about, right? And if it is first quadrant, and which axis are you talking about? Pi by 2, which is, this is pi by 2, which is vertical axis. And we told very clearly vertical axis, this the identity changes, and the sec identity will change only to cosec, right? Not to something else. It will either say as sec or cosec, but all of them are positive, so the answer will be positive. Let's look at from a second quadrant perspective, right? If I tell you what is sine of pi by 2 plus theta. Now, who is jumping in the second quadrant? Actually, it is sine who is jumping in the second quadrant. When I am saying jumping, I am referring to the left hand side. Now, if sine is jumping on the left hand side of the equation, and you're talking about second quadrant, then the answer will definitely be positive. Why? Because we know that sine is positive, whatever is the outcome of that is always positive, but we are jumping which axis? Vertical axis, so the answer will be cos of theta, right? Very clear. Now let me take a cosec of not cosec, let me take sec of pi by 2 plus theta. Now, if I take sec of pi by 2 plus theta, again I need to ask that question, which quadrant are we jumping? We are jumping in second quadrant. If sec were on the left hand side, it is on the left hand side of the equality, and it is jumping in the second quadrant, would the answer be positive? No, it is only when sine and cosec jumps. So the answer will be negative. And whenever you jump across the vertical axis, will its identity change? The answer is yes. So it will become cosec theta. Let me take few more examples so that we can end the video, and I hope that I did justice to it, but let me know otherwise. If I tell you what is tan of let's say pi minus theta. Now, which quadrant are we talking about? Pi happens to be here and minus theta happens to be in second quadrant. Now, tell me, on the left hand side of equality, who is jumping? It is tan. Who should ideally jump on the left hand side should give you a positive value? It is only sine and cosec. So this should give me a negative value. But we know for sure when somebody jumps from the horizontal axis, the identity doesn't change and it stays as tan. So it stays as tan theta. Clean and clear, right? Now let's look at another example. If I tell you what is cot of 3 pi by 2 minus theta. Now when I'm saying cot, now 3 pi by 2 is the vertical axis, so which means 3 pi by 2 is the vertical axis, and I'm actually jumping in the third quadrant. Now if who in the third quadrant on the left hand side should give me a positive value, if it is tan on the left hand side or cot on the left hand side, right? Which is very clear, cot is on the left hand side, so my answer should turn out to be positive. But what axis am I jumping? Am I jumping from the vertical axis? If I'm jumping from the vertical axis, my identity of cot should change to tan theta, right? And that is what I wanted to tell you. And I'm probably wanting to take the last or the second last example here, changing the color of my pen. If I tell you what is sec of pi plus theta, right? And what is sec of pi plus theta? Now pi plus theta happens to be a horizontal movement, right? And which quadrant are you referring to? You're referring to the third quadrant. Who on the left hand side of the equation should give you a positive sign here? It's only all silver t. T means tan or cot. Who is there on the left hand side? It's actually sec. So this should give me a negative value. If this is giving me a negative value and I know that I'm jumping on the horizontal axis, then the identity of sec doesn't change and it becomes sec theta, right? Let me take last one example here. If I tell you what is the value of cot of 3 pi by 2 plus theta, right? And what is 3 pi by 2? Which means I'm talking about the vertical axis, right? Now I know for sure when you talk about a vertical axis, the cot identity changes to tan. That is for sure, right? We are very clear about it. Now the question is about the sign. Now all silver T cups, and cup stands for cos or sec. Who should be on the left hand side of equality? It should be cos or sec. If they jump, then the answer is positive. It's not cos, neither cos nor sec, and it's actually cot, so the answer should be minus tan theta. I hope guys you got it, made it simple. Didn't want to make this lengthy video. If you didn't get it, I will delete this video, create a new one for you. But do let me know if you felt this was useful, and we'll create more videos. Thank you very much and all the best.